the floor to Nantina Tsekeri, who is our director of DCI-Greece, and who is obviously knows very well this thematic to present a very distinguished panel and the discussion. Nantina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alex. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for staying with us for this last but not least plenary of the day. It is a real honor to welcome you all, distinguished guests, but also panelists, today to this high panel discussion, focusing on one, as already highlighted, very critical and urgent issue, which is the detention of children on the move. We are already 5 years from the UN Global Study on Children Deprived of Liberty, which put the spotlight on this specific injustice, provided evidence, insights, but also pathways for change. However, 5 years after, we are compelled to ask today ourselves, where are we now? What has changed? And what can we do next? The hard truth is that as we speak at the moment, and also I'm reflecting on my own experience on the ground, there are countless of children on the move who are kept in detention facilities or in de facto detention facilities around the globe. Children whose only crime was to flee their country in search of safety and cross borders. On the other hand, another unbearable truth at the moment is that we don't have the luxury of time, since we're experiencing massive displacement driven by conflict, genocide, climate change, inequalities, and many other human rights violations. And in response, we witness one state after another to close their doors, and to resort to punitive and strict policies that very often do not nurture the essence of the children, that many of them are with us here today because many of them, they have the experience of displacement. For all of us who work with these children, we know that very often this plight goes unheard, but they do have faces, they do have names, and they are children as all children with an amazing potential to fulfill their dreams and extraordinary resilience. Saying so, I will start with Jamil, who is a former unaccompanied minor who arrived in Greece a couple of years ago. And we have the privilege to work with him very closely in Greece. He's one of our DCI-Greece ambassadors. But also Jamil is a mentor now in the Greek Ministry of Migration and Asylum, supporting other children on the move. And he's also a student in international relations. So thank you, Jamil, for being here with us today. I would like to ask you to just share with us elements of your experience, but also of the stories that you have heard from the children you support, and to set the scene, actually. You have the floor.
Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you a lot, DCI, for inviting me here. It was a very big day, so I will not be very long. And I wasn't expecting to be the first, but it's fine. So my name is Jamil. I'm from Afghanistan, but I'm living in Greece for the last almost 7 years. So when I came to Greece, I was an unaccompanied minor and I was living in a safe zone. But before arriving in Greece, I had this difficult journey. And this difficult journey, only the people they have been through, only they can understand this. So I will not talk from the very beginning. I will talk from Turkey, for example. It took me almost 6 months and almost 23 pushbacks from the sea and from the land border to be able to arrive in Greece. So when I was in Turkey and I was trying to come to Greece because it was not possible to live in Turkey, that's why I wanted to leave. I left one hell. I didn't want it to live in another. So I really wanted to leave Turkey and I wanted to live in a country that I will be able to study and I will be able to be free. So that's why I tried so many times. So every time that I was trying, the borders were closed. So every time we were caught by the border police. Unfortunately, the border police, they were very cruel. They were beating people, and after beating, they were letting people leaving people on the border to go back to Turkey. And then all these people, including me, we were getting caught by the Turkey police, and they were taking us to the detention center. So when we talked, they were saying it's a closed camp. It wasn't really a closed camp. It was a detention center. For example, we only had 1 hour the whole day to come out of our room. The rest of the day, for 23 hours, we were inside the rooms, and we could only get out for breakfast, for lunch, for dinner, which was not really eatable, only for 20 minutes, 3 times per day. So it was very difficult, and there was no system. For example, all the people, the adults, the families, and the minors, they were the same for them. There was no interview, there was no questioning. Like if someone is a minor, the minor should not be in the same cell with adults. But I was a minor, my younger brother was a minor, and we were in the same cell with other, let's say, 30 to 40 adults. And they never think about it, that it's not okay. They were putting all these people together. And after that, for example, after all these pushbacks, after all this beating and everything, finally, when we arrived in Greece, again, we face the same things. For example, even on the border in Greece, when we were getting caught by the police, we were putting in a police station until they deport us back. So in this police station, they were putting us in the room where there are everyone, the families, small children. I have seen children that they were like only some days newborn children. So they didn't really care about it. And I have heard stories that there were people that they were ripped off of their clothes and sent back to Turkey, for example. So after that, when I arrived in Greece, the situation was even worse. For example, when I was in Turkey, I was trying to pass the border. I was facing all these challenges and difficulties. I thought when I will arrive in Greece, things will be better. But unfortunately, it wasn't like this. For example, me and my brother, we were like outside for many days, and we were trying to find help, and there was nobody to help us. Even though we were minors, we were trying our best to go to organization, to refugee camps. Nobody was trying to help us because there was no help available. So we were not able to live in any place which is designed for refugees. So finally, we were obliged to get in a refugee camp and start living there in a container, in a broken container, illegally, because they were not registering us in the camp. So that's why we lived there for many months illegally. We were not registered in the camp, and so if something would happen, nobody would know about us because we were not registered in the camp. But after many months, finally they registered us in the camp, in a safe zone, a small place which is designed only for a specific number of unaccompanied minors. So we were living there, but the trauma, for example, the things that I saw when I was crossing the border, the police especially on the borders, they are very cruel, and the experiences they have, these experiences are not experience that they can use this with children or with people that they are vulnerable. These are experiences that they use with criminals, but they were using the same with us, with everyone that they were in the group. So that's why, like many people, including me, even though now I'm living in Greece, I have a house, I have a very good job, for example, I get over it, but still I have the flashbacks, for example. I still sometimes something comes up to my mind, and then I start feeling very bad about it. And unfortunately, I cannot do anything about it because there was no accountability. For example, as Jaden said about children's rights, me too, I didn't know because nobody told me. Now I know about it because I'm a professional, I'm working with children. Now I know about children's rights. I didn't know then. So that's why if these children finally they will arrive in a country, for example, they will live in a shelter, and after they will be in the community living a normal life, why they have to go through all this trauma, why they have to be humiliated by the police, why they have to face this inhumane situation, for example. Because when they face all these things, this never go away. Even though many people, many children, they have resilience, they get over it, but the memory never vanish. It always stay with the children. So that's why it's a very bad thing for all these children, but in the same time, it's very bad for the hosting country and for the community, because many of these children, they start having problem in the future after many years. When they start having these flashbacks, this is something very bad. So that's why I would really, can I answer for the? Okay, so I think it's something very important. Instead of making all this mess, for example, there must be professionals who are dealing with these children, for example, when they are arriving in a country, instead of the police, for example, instead of causing trauma to all these children, because in the end, it will affect the children, but also the hosting countries. So this is what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Many thank you, Jamil. Thank you for your courage to go back and share with us traumatic moments of your life story. And thank you for highlighting the mental impact of facing these injustice and deficiencies with the justice system. Thank you so much. We will get back to you later. Thank you. Now we'll move on with Miss Carolina Gottardo, Executive Director from International Detention Coalition, who is with us here today. And I will ask you, please, to describe the current context, the trends, and to share with us areas of progress, but also of regressions. You have the floor, Carolina.
Thank you so much, Nantina, and good afternoon to everyone, and good morning to all those that are online as well. I just want to say, I mean, what Jamil has said is extremely powerful, and it really resonated with so many children that we have been working with at IDC, and I don't get tired of repeating this quote because I think it really illustrates very well what Jamil was saying before, and it illustrates the effects of detention. And it's a quote from one person that was detained as a child, and I left immigration detention, but immigration detention never left me. And it's very similar. I mean, this is what we have seen again and again and again. I mean, this is such a damage in practice. And it's just never, ever in the best interest of the child to be detained under any circumstances. So, I mean, in terms of the general context and areas of what is happening, and also areas of progress and regression, there are many of both. So in terms of the general context, we know that immigration is one of the most politicized issues of our time right now. And we also know that there is a trend in terms of the criminalization of migration and the criminalization of migrants in many parts of the world. And detention, immigration detention, is one of the symptoms of that criminalization, alongside pushbacks, externalization of borders, etc. So this is part of that trend that we're seeing more and more. And unfortunately, what I have to say is that the use of detention has been expanding across most regions of the world. In saying that, there are also other regions that bring us some hope. And one of those regions is South America. South America is a region of hope because the immigration detention is not used in the same way there. And there are also some countries in other parts of the world and other areas of hope, like for instance, the SADC region, I would say, is also another area of hope. So there are also good things happening. But detention itself has been expanding, with the United States being the biggest detainer in the world. We are also seeing other trends, and for instance, one of them is the use of alternative places of detention. So people and children not being necessarily in detention centers, but in other places that are alternative. It could be hotels, it could be so-called shelters, it could be closed centers, whatever you want to call them. These are alternative places of detention, but they are detention. The other thing we're seeing is also alternative forms of detention. So for instance, the use of electronic tagging and monitoring, which is like virtual detention, is an alternative form of detention rather than an alternative to detention. So we're seeing that. And unfortunately, immigration detention is a multi-million-dollar business. So we are seeing also the privatization of many facilities and being run by private companies is kind of a business as well. So that we're seeing, and as Nantina said it before, unfortunately we have more children should not be detained, but we have more than 300,000 children detained. So we are just far from being there yet. And there are some countries that explicitly ban immigration detention. So there are some very positive laws, but then there is also sometimes a gap in between the law and the practice in terms of what is happening with child immigration detention. So in some cases is the implementation what is failing rather than the lack of law of a regulation. And in other cases it's because there is no law or because the law criminalizes immigration in general, including for families and children. There are also problems with like age assessment. So many children that should not be in detention, their age being wrongly assessed, and therefore issues to do with that's also happening. And another phenomenon is like children, as I was saying before, like the co-option of the language with regards to child detention. So calling places like shelters that sound like a nice place, but in reality they are closed-door centers that are detention. So we are also seeing that kind of de facto detention. And one of the very sad realities that we see in different places is that, for instance, there is this argument that families should not be separated. So therefore, let's detain the families or let's detain the children. But of course, family separation could not be used as an argument for detention and is never in the best interest of the child. So we're seeing that as well. With regards to regional trends, I just want to highlight one, that is the EU Pact on Asylum and Migration. And I'm going to speak out progress because there has also been progress, but on the Pact on Asylum and Migration, unfortunately, that is the pact is recent. And what we're seeing there is the potential for the extension of the detention state across the European borders. And unfortunately, this is extending to children regardless of age. So that's what I will call a regression in that sense with regards to the area of immigration detention. Now, the thing is that things don't have to be this way, and it is very clear under international law that detention is never, ever in the best interest of the child. And detention, I mean, there could not be more studies showing the very devastating impact, physical, psychologically, on children, on their families, on the communities, on society as a whole. It's so much evidence on this. It shouldn't be happening. No child should be detained for immigration-related reasons. But yes, we're seeing that, and it's not only not in the best interest of the child, it's also a form of violence against children. And children are children first, more than migrants, and we cannot put in migration concerns over the best interest of the child, because the rights of the child need to prime in every type of context. But unfortunately, this is not always the case. So in terms of progress, just speaking a bit more positively, because of course we have seen a lot of regressions and negative trends, there is also progress. So this is an area where there is a momentum on ending child immigration detention. So some countries are taking positive actions. There is new legislation and there are new practices on this area. So it's not an area, I mean, it's an area where we could definitely advance, and I think we are advancing. So for instance, the Global Compact for Migration has Objective 13 that's very clear in terms of the need to end child immigration detention. And we have a number of jurisdictions, mainly in those countries that I mentioned to you in those regions like South America, some in Asia, some in Southern Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa do not detain children for migration purposes. And then we have also some regional policies that are quite positive with regards to this area. So we have the Brazil Declaration, which emphasizes the importance of ending the immigration detention of children. We have the ASEAN Declaration on the Rights of the Child. This is for the ASEAN region, again, has specific issues on alternatives. And we have the SADC, or the Southern Africa Commitment, to develop alternatives to detention. So at that level in the regions, there has been some advancement. And with regards to national initiatives, we are seeing a number of countries that are advancing. So I spoke about South America, but there are countries like, say, Colombia, Ireland, Malawi. These are countries that are not detaining children for immigration-related reasons. And we have two countries that have recently outlawed child immigration detention. One of them is Belgium. So at the same time that the pact was being passed, Belgium outlawed child immigration detention this year. Mexico had done that at the end of 2020, 2021. They outlawed child immigration detention. I mean, I'm not saying the practice is perfect, but there is legislation there. And we have to consider how much of a progress that is, considering, I mean, looking at the advance in that area. Germany also pledged to do the same. That pledge hasn't been implemented yet, but they pledged at the International Migration Review Forum. In Thailand, there was a memorandum of understanding in between 7 different government departments, and as a result, 500 plus children and families have been released from immigration detention. So this has been a big progress in Thailand. And then we have countries like Egypt and Jordan, where there has been the mainstreaming of child protection systems, and work with the UN and with civil society in terms of ensuring that migrants and refugees children are covered by child protection systems. Then in Indonesia, there is also guardianship and kinship for migrant children and refugee children. And South Korea temporarily regularized children that are in education. So as you can see, these are some examples to show you that there are advances. So I started with the regressions and finishing with the advances. So my last point is to say we need to continue this fight until we ensure that there is not a single child in immigration detention in any country around the world. And this is an area where we will continue advancing, and we need to continue pushing for that.
Thank you, Carolina, for sharing with us the aggressions, but also we're very happy to see that there are improvements, and we're looking forward to more. And now we'll move to Michael. And from Human Rights Watch, Michael Bochenek, if I pronounce it well, Senior Counsel, Children's Rights Division from Human Rights Watch. So, Michael, some countries have reduced their reliance on detention, but they have turned into other abusive practices. From the Human Rights Watch perspective, what do you have to share with us in relation to this?
Well, unfortunately, I can't end on a positive note the way that we just heard. What I'm considering as I think about the universe of ways that states are trying to get around international obligations, really subverting protections, has been very creative and very pernicious. And so I think some of the trends that we've been seeing, bearing in mind that in some cases, to the extent that there's a positive, it's been less use of detention, but that's been through trends like pushbacks. We just heard about from Jamil the phenomenon of countries refusing entry and forcibly returning or indeed impeding arrival at the borders in a way that is completely contrary to various international principles. It denies the right to seek asylum. It denies the right of children to specific international protection. It has the strong potential of returning people to harm. And then it's usually carried out in ways that can be quite brutal, as in the cases we heard of Greece to Turkey. This is not unique to any one country. The European Union, particularly at its external borders, has made extensive use of pushbacks from Croatia to Bosnia, from Croatia to Serbia, also countries outside the European Union, Serbia to other countries, and there can be a chain in these pushbacks from Italy to Slovenia to Croatia to Bosnia, for example. And we also see this purely internally within the European Union, from France to Italy, not necessarily there violently, I should say, but still without regard for the status in particular of children and the principle in international standards that minority is declarative, that as soon as you say you are a child, as long as it reasonably appears you could be so, that's how the authorities should treat you. That's written into French law, it's written into other European Union law, but it's not practiced in situations like this. So instead we see these returns. And I've focused on the European Union simply because it's been so common in so many different countries. But of course, we have also seen this in places like Mexico to Central America, the United States to Mexico. Sometimes it's a more technical kind of a pushback. The United States, for example, using a program called Remain in Mexico. That is, we agree that you have an asylum claim that we will hear eventually in the United States. But in the meantime, you must wait in Mexico, often in quite dire conditions, while your claim is heard, with no accommodations made for the age of family members, so that families with very, very young children were staying in very, very difficult circumstances for months and months and months. That's one set of factors that we've been seeing, which really is not detention, nor really de facto detention, but another series of human rights violations with obvious trauma and other harms that result. I think a second that's worth mentioning is the very specific phenomenon, but perhaps unfortunately growing, of offshore, not simply detention, but offshore processing. So we have the old example of Australia sending people to Papua New Guinea and Nauru. That was actually copied from the United States, which used Guantanamo for that purpose when it was receiving large numbers of Haitians and Cubans in the 1980s. We have the idea of the UK's idea of sending people to Rwanda, which never amounted to anything, but did cost apparently 750 million pounds. But now the idea of doing this in Albania, I see shocks here. Yes, 750 million pounds, and I think it was 2 people who ended up going. These are always phenomenal wastes of money, but that's not the real argument against them. The real argument against them is, of course, that people often have no idea where these countries are, never intended to be there, and not only are forcibly transferred in ways that denies dignity, but also often are in circumstances that are quite similar to the ones that Jamil described in Greece. So very, very dire conditions once they arrive, with no prospect of a future in a lot of these places. That's number 2. We've heard age assessment, and I think that's worth just flagging. We may be able to discuss that a little bit later, but more generally, the idea of using procedural mechanisms, particularly to deny protection to children. So insisting that they follow specific protocols for filing asylum claims, even though they're not really capable of presenting these claims, understanding a complicated foreign legal system, and doing this on their own, and should in fact be receiving help to do so. Sometimes the technicality that because they are under the age of 18, so procedurally denying them the opportunity to do so. And then we have the age assessment phenomenon of denying them access to asylum. Sorry if the volume is not good. 2 more things before I end. One is, we've heard about conditions of reception. So once people arrive, once children arrive on their own or with families, really inadequate reception conditions. And I think sometimes these are deliberate. We know about, for example, the hostile environment policies in the United Kingdom, and that's a thread that has continued for more than a decade. But in many other cases, of course, we just have reception conditions that leave children with a sense that they are abandoned, that they're receiving no education, that the living conditions are humiliating and degrading, and that there is no future for them in the place that they think that they have arrived with the expectation of seeking safety. And then that leads to one final comment, which is just uncertainty of status immediately and for the future has always been a problem, but I think it is increasing in an increasing concern as we see states beginning to rely on these kinds of procedural mechanisms to deny protection, if not immediately, then certainly for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for sharing with us these new trends and creative ways sometimes states resort to in order to go around detention, but still we speak about gross human rights violations. And now I will turn to UNHCR, to Madeline Garlick, Chief of Protection Policy and Legal Advice, Division of International Protection, UNHCR. We know that UNHCR has made its position clear that children must never be detained, although this is still happening, as we discussed already. Would you elaborate on the relevant legal standards and what are the challenges you see from your own perspective in practice? You have the floor.
Thank you very much. And I'd really like to thank Defence for Children International for organising this event today. I'm Madeline Garlick from UNHCR, that's the UN Refugee Agency. And though we've heard lots of discouraging news today, and including in some of the very sobering realities that Carolina and Michael have outlined, one good and very positive thing is that you in the front row here are with us. It's really important that we have children and youth here in the discussions that we're having around these issues, because you're the present, but you're also the future. And it's critically important that we're going to have strong voices, strong activists who are going to be speaking out of the importance of rights for children and access for it in practice. So thank you for being here, because what you're going to be doing is crucial. So you've asked me about this from the UN Refugee Agency's perspective, and I want to be very clear up front that for UNHCR, children should never be detained for immigration purposes. And this position on our part is based on the binding legal standards in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which of course, as many of us know, provides that the best interests of children should always be paramount in matters concerning them. And what we consider is that the evidence bears out clearly that it is never in children's best interests to be detained. We see evidence of enormous damage to mental and physical health. We see even short periods of detention can cause acute stress and trauma, and that they're likely to have long-term deleterious effects on a child's well-being and development. Now, another very important legal standard from the Convention on the Rights of the Child is the provision which states that children have a right to liberty. And this is based on wider human rights law, which says actually that all human beings should have a right to liberty. But crucially, this Convention on the Rights of the Child emphasises this specifically with regards to children. Now, that convention's a crucially important treaty because it's one of the most widely ratified treaties in the world. 196 states worldwide have ratified that. So that's all of the UN's member states, except for the United States of America. So when you go and speak to governments, you can point out to almost all of them that they are bound by this, that they have voluntarily undertaken a commitment to abide by these provisions. And that's a very powerful argument that we can all use in advocacy. What we see as UNHCR is, regrettably, there is an increased use of detention worldwide, and this includes detention of children, whether unaccompanied or detained with their families. We see at least 77 states where we think that there is an important and pressing need for law or policy reform to ensure that international human rights law is respected, not only to ban the detention of children for immigration control purposes, but importantly also to provide a legal basis for alternative care arrangements. Children need to have accommodation, they need to have a place where they can get shelter, where they can be safe, where they can have access to facilities like education, to healthcare and other things. And so states need to go beyond simply not detaining them. They need to provide for other arrangements which will ensure all of their needs and their rights are met. In addition, we unfortunately see too many countries where detention is excessively used with no legal basis or justification. We see this coming about because there are mistakes in age assessment or because best interests procedures are not properly carried out. We also unfortunately see increased use of what is known as de facto detention, and that's a fancy Latin word for detention in practice. And this happens, regrettably, in so many cases where states restrict the movement of people, including children, but they don't call it that. And this makes it extremely difficult to tackle because the safeguards and the procedural arrangements that should be in place to ensure that detention is properly regulated and managed are not then always available for those people who are detained under these de facto arrangements. We see with great concern that there is increased reliance on immigration detention in the context also of the EU Pact on Immigration and Asylum. This set of laws, which Carolina mentioned, has recently come into force, and even though there are some areas where it's brought about improvement, we're very concerned that it's going to lead to greater use of detention at borders and in places that are far away from cities, from towns, from places where people could seek advice from lawyers, could have access to guardians, or could have other important safeguards that they could call upon. And so it's going to be very important that there's effective monitoring of the implementation of these new EU rules, and that civil society organisations, international bodies and others are going to be able to monitor it, to be able to communicate with children in detention in these contexts, and to be able to ensure that they can get access to rights. Now, there are some good practices, I'm glad to say, and it's important that we do focus on those because the states that have these deserve recognition, and they should also be presented to other countries to show that it can be done in a way that it doesn't infringe on rights. Colombia is an important champion country in this regard, one which does not resort to immigration detention either for children or adults, showing that this is possible and one can still manage access to asylum and migration without it. Ireland is another important country, Mexico. Carolina has mentioned Belgium and Malawi as well. I want to mention Mexico specifically because even though the practice isn't perfect, we have seen new legislation which bans detention of children and which provides that children should also come under the National System for Protection of Children. So this is the same rights as other children that are citizens as well. Importantly also, as a good practice, I want to underscore some of the things that are going on in Greece, where we've been pleased to see that there is a new national emergency response mechanism, which has been established to provide immediate care for unaccompanied minors arriving in the country, and that Greece has discontinued the previous practice of placing them in police custody. And so this is an important advance that needs to be welcomed. So we see under that national emergency response mechanism that unaccompanied children are being placed in safe facilities where they get comprehensive support and have access to an emergency helpline. So despite the discouraging and problematic areas, there are pockets of hope, and we should continue to look for these and to disseminate information about them widely because they can be replicated elsewhere. Thank you.
And now I will move to UNICEF, to Tasha Gill, Global Lead Migration and Displacement from UNICEF. The question I have prepared for you is how can a whole-of-government approach and cross-border coordination be effectively utilized to eliminate the detention of children on the move? You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Nantina, and it's great to be here with this panel. On behalf of UNICEF, I want to speak to this question and really highlight the issue of how systems can address this. In this morning's panel, we heard about system change. And so let me speak to how systems that are well connected can provide alternatives for children. And what is important for these systems is first and foremost that they are inclusive of all children, regardless of their status. And systems are also interconnected. At UNICEF, we are working very hard to make sure that national child protection systems are inclusive of all children. And what this means is that we're building them up so that child protection systems can take the lead or at least take a leading role alongside migration systems to ensure that there is no detention of children and that decisions are made on their best interest. And this includes every step of that process, from reception at border and also placed in families and communities. A formal partnership between the child protection system and these other systems is essential to making sure that it works for children and for their families. I want to speak a little bit to the toolbox, the skills and what's necessary in order to be able to make sure that this works to support these services for children. And as I go through this long list I have, I'm thinking about what you described in that experience and the experience of other children, and whether this list would help to address, mitigate, and rectify, be a course correction so that we know that all children then would not face those conditions, but rather receive the support, protection, inclusion, and empowerment that they need. So by working with the policies, the systems, the services, but especially the personnel of interconnected systems to be able to ensure non-detention of children and to meet their protection needs. It means working with border officials, immigration, asylum, judicial, police, detention staff, civil society to end the detention of children. And when we talk about working with personnel, there's another aspect I'd like to highlight, and that is the beliefs and norms of all of the staff of all of those services, and why training them is so essential to be able to put child rights first and foremost. So what are some of those safeguards? Vulnerability screening and referral mechanism, not to police, but to community-based centers and to child protection services, whether it's at the border or places of identification. Individualized best interest procedures, ensuring that the best interest of the child is what determines the decision affecting what happens to that child next. That there are processes to make sure that best interests of children within families are also taken into consideration when their cases are presented. Making sure that children's voices are heard, and making sure that their views are taken into account. For unaccompanied children, ensuring that there are guardians to accompany them in the process. Preventing family separation, promoting family reunification at every step of the way. This is part of the entire system. And then access. Access to many things, access to fair asylum migration process, access to interpreters and cultural mediators, access to justice and effective remedies. For children without guardians, supported access to all of those services relies on the child protection system, the National Child Protection System, to do that. And minimum standards, ensuring that there are child-sensitive minimum standards in all of the community centers and all of the places where children can provide access to schooling, to support, and to mental health and psychosocial support as well. Earlier today, we heard about the importance of oversight and also complaint mechanisms. And I want to mention how important it is to think about what is necessary for a child to be able to actually register a complaint. What trust a child would have to have in those services and systems to take that courageous step to register a complaint. And it's only through a child protection system that brings together personnel who have been trained, who put children's interests first and foremost, that perhaps a child would be able to register a complaint. This goes beyond knowing. This goes into the behaviors, the norms, the way in which children are addressed in the system. And so it's important that we have these oversight mechanisms and that we're reporting on what's happening to children all along the path. The last point I want to make, so first, that the systems are interconnected, that they're inclusive of children. Second, that there's a huge toolbox that's needed. And the last point is that when these systems work for children on the move, they work for all children in that country. They lift up all services for all children. And we have examples where this has happened, especially for foster family care, for alternative care for children who are unaccompanied. By investing in the resources, in the services, and the personnel for children on the move, all children have benefited. So for all of those reasons, working through these systems are ways in which we can ensure that alternative detention actually work for children on the move. Thank you.
Thank you for highlighting the interconnection between systems, and indeed also we have witnessed many times that when there is no a child protection system for all children in place, this has a domino effect also when we speak for children in the context of migration. Now we'll move to IOM, to Andria. Andria Kenney, Senior Specialist from the IOM Immigration and Border Governance. Thank you for being with us today. The question I have for you is from your own perspective, what role does the IOM play in supporting governments to end the detention of children on the move, and what progress have you observed so far?
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Thank you also to my fellow panelists for the interesting conversations. So I'm from the International Organization for Migration, or the UN Migration Agency. We do a number of things in this sphere. One of them that I would like to talk about is, selfishly, is my own area of work, which is what we've called humanitarian border management. Humanitarian border management is this idea of reconciling state sovereignty and their obligations in terms of national security with their human rights obligations that they have signed up for, and how they should actually be handling border crossing experiences, irregular or regular, however it looks like, all in border areas, so that people like Jamil should never have to have the experience that they have had. No person, no child should ever have to go through that. And so we do a lot of trainings with frontline border officials, immigration officials, police, judiciary, and higher up with policymakers about their country's human rights obligations and better ways of managing borders, whether it's in a migration crisis specifically, but in any time of migration context. And so we've done a lot of trainings with governments across the board. This is beyond detention, but I'll get to that in just a minute because detention intersects with this. Countries across the world where we sit with them and we do intense trainings about what human rights violations look like, how these things should be handled. And the whole point is that borders remain open, they're functional, there's enough staff, they have social workers, child protection specialists, interpreters, cultural mediators, as we've mentioned. And referral mechanisms in place, enough staff to actually do the job properly and not only police. And I can say as a bit of a positive note, in a number of these environments, I've had so many border police come to us afterwards and say that they would like to do better. They didn't know that they had these particular obligations. They didn't know about certain human rights instruments. This is not to defend any of them or excuse any of the behavior that has happened, but I have been really surprised by the number of police especially who say they want to do better. Sometimes it's a matter of not knowing, other times it's orders from above and they don't know how to get out of it. So we've also had to now move the discussion higher up the chain to other policymakers as well. Where I've seen possibly the most resistance to this discussion has been among European states, though I will say, in terms of the negative side of things. So when it comes to child detention, child immigration detention, like everyone here, I think we are of the position that no child should ever be in detention. It is never in their best interest. I think that's clear. It's been reiterated, but I think we can't say it enough. It's very clear. So we basically focus on advocacy, alternatives to detention, non-custodial measures, alternative care arrangements. And I'm glad that this de facto concept has been brought up because this is where I think a lot of us get into a sticky situation. It's nice to make detention conditions nicer, but that's not an alternative. They're still detained. So it has to be properly, open freedom of movement, not actually detention. So de facto detention is, I don't want to say marginally better. It's not much better. So we support states to transition from this perspective that irregular entry is actually a crime, it's not, to a perspective that it is at best an administrative offense, but also to shift away from this idea of using administrative detention as part of migration management. When it comes to detention of children on the move specifically, we align with the common position that children should not be detained while awaiting any kind of decision on their application for international protection or asylum claim. They should not be detained alone or with family or at all if they are awaiting some kind of relocation process, depending on where they are. We also advocate for children to remain with families, of course. And so if the parents are implicated in some kind of immigration offense, the parents should not be, or the family members should not be detained because the children have to stay with them and they should not be detained. So none of them should be detained essentially. And we have some practical basis to support states in making this shift. In some detention centers are open, we don't manage any sites, for the record, open, closed, or otherwise. But we do provide some services on request of governments in terms of, again, interpretation, cultural mediation, occasionally working on the facilities. I won't get into that because I personally don't agree with that. And this might sound like an easy conversation. It's not an easy conversation. IOM is actually, we have offices everywhere. We have a lot of connections to governments, a lot of connections to immigration officials as well. But we are still, we don't have a normative mandate. We don't have a treaty that we guard. And as an organization officially, as I'm reminded all the time, we do not take a position on internal legislative or policy decisions of individual states or groups such as the EU. That being said, we advocate. And I will say, because of our access, we're actually lucky in many ways to be operationally present, you could say, because we do have then access entry points where we can sort of start the dialogue on making a change and releasing children from detention. And we have good examples of this. The one example that comes to mind is in Indonesia. This was actually done in close coordination with UNHCR to release migrant children. And then restart the discussion with authorities on their policy. I'll pause there for now. I know we're getting tight on time. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. So I'm thinking of changing a little bit the plan. We had a second set of questions to go around, but I'm really conscious of time. So, and I really want to give the floor to the audience to comment, reflect, and ask questions. So I will give again the floor to Jamil to convey a message and also to reflect on what you heard. Then I will invite you to react, share, comment, ask questions. And if we have more time, we get back to the other questions if you also agree with this plan. Okay? Great. So Jamil.
Hello again. So I would like to mention, even though there were a lot of problems, difficulties, and challenges, and there are still many challenges and difficulties, but in the same times, I would also like to mention the positive side of the things that are happening in Greece, for example, from the creation of General Secretariat for Vulnerable Persons and Institutional Protection in 2020, things have become much better now. For example, as Madeline already mentioned, the NERM. For example, it's a team which are like helping unaccompanied minors. So the goal of this team is no unaccompanied minor should stay homeless or in the streets. So every time, if there is an unaccompanied minor, the unaccompanied minor can call through WhatsApp or a direct call, or someone else, for example, if someone see an unaccompanied minor homeless, they can call to this team, and this team goes and talk with the unaccompanied minor, and then place this unaccompanied minor in a shelter all around Greece. It can be anywhere around Greece. And except this one, I will not go in depth because I'm not specialist in this part. My beloved colleague, Angeliki Aroni, will talk about it tomorrow. So another good practice that happened in Greece is the guardianship network. For example, in 2000 until the end of 2022, and let's say even until June 2023, there was no guardian for unaccompanied minors in Greece. But after June 2023, this system started working, the guardianship system, and now all around Greece, all the unaccompanied minors that they are living in shelters, all of them, they have a guardian, which is something very good. There were no guardians for unaccompanied minors before this. And except this, for example, a mentorship team that I'm a mentor, and we are 6 in total. We are from different countries. We have different backgrounds, and we like 6 mentors, we almost speak like 9 to 10 languages. So this is something good that we are going to the shelters, we are visiting shelters and also semi-independent living apartments, and we are talking with children. We are sharing our lived experiences, but in the meantime, we also give advices, and we also spread information about new projects, which is something very good. So the children know if they want, like, for example, to register in an activity, or if they want information about a specific thing. So we are able to give this information in their mother tongue. And except this, in the shelters, for example, at the moment, there are very good professionals that they are trying their best to help the children, to support the children. So they are registering the children in public schools, but except the school, they are also trying to register these children in sport activities, for example, because this is an important part of every child life, every children's life, that they have to have a good time. They must have the freedom to play, to have like to learn something. So that's why. And the last I would like to mention, this is something very important, as Adrian mentioned, that we have, like, for example, the IOM professionals, and they are like trying their best to help, for example, minors, but in the meantime, the general population, for example. So this is something very good. If there are professionals like this in the entry points of the countries, and then they deal with the unaccompanied minors, for example, instead of the police and the army, things will be much better for the children, but in the meantime for the country and for the communities, because nothing good will happen with the violence, with the trauma, with the depression, and with the PTSD. So that's why I really wanted to mention this in the very beginning. If the children are treated better, then the future will be good and better for them as well. Thank you a lot.
Thank you, Jamil, and for again, thank you for sharing your difficult experiences in the beginning, but also now sharing with us this positive news. And you are one of these professionals, actually. You are part of that, and I think this is also really important to you as a new registration. And also, I know that you want to convey this message to us because you work with these children, and it's very important to you never to go through what you've been through yourself and your brother. And now I would like to open the floor and to receive questions, reflections, comments. We had more, as I said before, themes to delve into, like non-custodial approaches and so on, but we will do it tomorrow in the breakout sessions. So who would like? Okay, let's start. Please introduce yourselves and where you come from, and then you can proceed.
Hi, my name is Claire Racian. I'm from University College Cork in Ireland. Thank you so much to all the panelists for your very interesting talks, and especially to Jamil for his personal story. And not to detract from anything that was said, it was very good to hear some encouraging news. But this is my research area. I'm actually have written a book on this particular issue of unaccompanied children and migration, particularly reception conditions in several European states. So I've been looking at it since 2018, and I've been to Greece and been in the Samos, the Vathai hotspot there, and then returned to Greece and went to Athens this summer and spoke with numerous NGOs and also lawyers representing unaccompanied children there. And also I'm working and writing with the Irish system of direct provision and various different other countries and states and practice there. My point is, it's not a positive picture that I would kind of take from any of my research or from talking to other various professionals. So I was kind of surprised to hear that under the new pact for asylum and migration, for example, it's quite a, like as Michael pointed out, it's a retrogressive step, if anything, or I think one of your other speakers as well. In terms of the border policing issue, there's great violence against children, horrific pushbacks, Jamila, as you've described yourself, and severe forms of violence against children, de facto detention. In fact, now as well, with the EU support, Greece has opened closed control access centres, as I'm sure you all know, which are children are heavily surveilled. They have to pass through turnstiles. Their biometrics are taken. These are the shelters that they're put into. I spoke to people who conduct the best interest assessment with unaccompanied children in Greece, and they were shocked to say that they do the assessment and then they don't know where the children are taken on the mainland. The camps are so hidden. So there's a lot of different perspectives. In terms of the Irish system, children are kept for up to 15, 18 years from the day they're born in a hotel room with no access to rights, where they live on a weekly stipend of less than €15 a week. So it's not, I would say, an example of good practice, even though I know that the government are trying hard to change it, but it has been in operation for over 20 years. So it's just to be, I suppose, realistic. That's my reflection on this, and to look at the underlying causes, the root causes, and why there is no solution. We can talk about what, Article 37, Article non-implementation of Article 37, for example, even though it is implemented by the EU in the Reception Conditions Directive, there's reference to Article 37 CRC in it. There's also reference to the best interests all through, but really what we need to focus on is incorporation, implementation of non-discrimination. That's the key to actually allow all children, irrespective of their migration status,